Hello everybody, and thanks for joining this session. My name is Ruth Thomas, and I'm Industry Principal here at Curo Compensation. Today's session is all about can you pay to retain talent? And we're going to be looking at the role pay plays in talent retention, because compensation we know is often said to be a primary driver of that. Although this has been widely debated in recent years, particularly where we've seen the situation with salary budgets being very restricted, and employers have sought new ways to engage their employees beyond pay. We've also seen many commentators debate whether extrinsic or intrinsic reward is more effective, not least, of course, most of us have heard reference Dan Pink and his eponymous work Drive, where he looked at whether money can actually be more of a dissatisfier from a motivational point of view. So we wanted today to look at this session, have a bit of a debate around the issue and really ask that question, can you pay to retain talent? So in this session, we wanted to start off with some brief introductions and housekeeping. We're then going to look at some labour market trends that are meaning that employee turnover or employee attrition is becoming a more significant issue. Then we're going to address more that question, can you pay to retain talent? And then move on to look at some of the things that you might want to consider if you're looking at improving pay-related attrition. And then we will allow time at the end for questions. So it is going to be a short session, so we will get through the content and then open the floor to questions. So you are all muted from a housekeeping perspective right now. You can submit a question at any time using the question box, or if you're having an issue from a technical perspective, you can either use the chat or the question box. We have Sue and John on from our marketing team. They'll hopefully respond to you as we go through the session. And if you don't want to ask your question now, that's perfectly fine. Just get in touch with us after via email and we'll be happy to take the conversation further. We are recording this session, so you will be provided with a link to that recording and a PDF of the materials. So on to introductions. Well, I've introduced myself. So I'm Ruth, and I'm based in London. And I'd like to welcome Glazal, who's our senior consultant in North America, based out of California. Good morning, Glazal.
Good morning or afternoon in your case.
Yes. So I thought I'd let you go on and do a short introduction to Curo if you wanted to take that one, Glazal.
Sure, absolutely. So first, we'd like to give a little bit of a background about Curo in case you're not familiar with our organization. We are a compensation management SaaS solution provider that specializes only in compensation. We service over 200 clients in 140 countries worldwide and help to manage compensation planning in at least 130 currencies and growing. And in addition to that, we currently have three main product offerings. Our Curo Enterprise product, which is a comprehensive and fully configurable solution, is designed to help companies with their compensation management and planning processes, whether you're simple or complex. Our Gender Pay Gap product, which is specifically designed to provide a complete solution for gender pay gap compliance reporting, insight, and analytics in the UK. And then our newly introduced Pay Equity Tracker product, which is a self-service solution designed to provide insights into global pay equity trends within organizations, as well as individual tracking of pay equity issues. Now, Curo has a strong list of partners, and we're continuously seeking out partnerships with companies that can enhance our product offering and assist to provide an overall complete solution for our clients. This is a sampling of some of our clients around the globe. You might recognize some of the logos like Aflac, Sony Music, AmeriGas, Ernst & Young, and the London Stock Exchange. This is a testament to the fact that our compensation software products service all sizes of companies within all industries around the globe.
Great, thanks, Glazal. Okay, so after that brief introduction, we're going to move on to today's content, and we wanted to start briefly looking at some of the key labour market trends and how that's impacting employee retention. So what we're seeing is across, as I'm sure many of you are aware, across the main global economies, we have record levels of low unemployment and an increasing number of job openings. In fact, in the US and the UK, there are more job openings than people actually out of work. And those economic conditions have really given employees power in the marketplace when it comes to seeking new employment. But that opportunity is not the same for all employees, because you've also got this high demand for new skills. So there's a bit of a skills mismatch going on. So many of the open positions out there are for skilled labor or new skills that, as a result of the predicted technology innovation from the fourth industrial revolution, they start to become more mainstream. So if we don't start reskilling, I think at current growth rates, we are going to see more severe talent shortages and probably labour markets getting tighter.
And I'd also like to add that actually there's a fourth trend to layer over this labour market picture, which is the low wage inflation. We've experienced the worst squeeze on wages in more than 100 years. And with wage inflation stagnating at around 2 to 3%, it's actually employees changing jobs who are getting a better pay progression, securing an average of about 10 to 20% increase in salary when they change jobs.
So really retaining talent in this environment is a key issue for employers. And I think you've got some figures on actual turnover rates, Gazelle, haven't you?
Yes, I do. So we know turnover is rising slowly. These average figures from Mercer show current rates, but it's important to note that these are different significantly by sector. But they do show retaining employees is difficult, or actually retaining the right talent with the right skills is difficult. And as we know, there is both bad and good attrition. As businesses' requirements for skills change, it makes sense that some employees leave the organization. So that brings us to our first survey question for the day. Do you measure the cost of your attrition? We'll give you a little bit of time to answer those questions.
Okay, I'll end polling there. And I'll share the results with you all, so hopefully you can see those on screen. So we've got about 38% of you saying you don't currently measure the cost of attrition, 50% of you saying you do but not consistently, and 13% of you saying we do consistently, and no one's currently using kind of predictive analytics to forecast attrition. So that's kind of in line, I guess, Gazelle, with what we thought we would see, that more people falling into those first two categories.
Yes, definitely.
Okay, well, I think we're going to go on then to talk a bit more about, I'm going to stop sharing those results with you and let you carry on to talk about the cost of turnover, Gazelle.
Yeah, so we know that turnover is costly for organizations. There are many models and examples of how to calculate the impact of this cost. We've listed a few here for you to consider. Josh Burson specifically suggests that the total cost of employee turnover can be anywhere from tens of thousands of dollars all the way up to 2 times somebody's annual salary. And then Forbes identifies the associated costs really based on the different levels of an employee, so it would be graduated according to those different levels. And then Sherm estimates the average cost to replace a salaried employee could be 6 to 9 months worth of their salary.
Thanks, Gazelle. And I think really when we start to think about the monetary value of employee attrition, it's those companies that have gone down the route of analysing attrition cost, using predictive analytics, and have come up with some fairly chunky numbers in terms of the cost to their organisation. And there's just 3 case studies that I've picked out here. Credit Suisse was kind of one of the first to come out publicly back in 2014, and they went down an exercise using predictive analytics. They say they reduced their attrition at that time by 1%, which equated to about 300 employees, who many would have left the organisation, and they actually moved into new positions. And they estimated that cost to have saved them between 75 and 100 million in rehiring and training costs as a result of that exercise. And IBM's done a similar study over the past few years, and they've quantified that as a 300 million saving for them over 4 years, and they've reduced critical turnover by 25%. And then someone else who's done this recently is Experian. So they've been doing an exercise working on a predictive analytics model for the last 18 months. And they've seen a drop in attrition of 2 to 3% with associated savings with that. What's interesting about that Experian model, I've put the link in there, is that they are actually going to bring that model to market. So they're actually going to package and sell the predictive analytics model that they used in-house and bring that to market. So if you're looking at, if you haven't got the resources in-house to have your own, analytics function, maybe buying something off the shelf may be useful for your organization. So let's go back to our original question, can you pay to retain talent? Well, we can see here that attrition-related costs are not insignificant. So maybe the simple answer is if it costs that much to lose people, maybe we should just pay them more.
Well, really, it's a little bit more than that. We need to look at why people are actually leaving organizations. So let's take a look at a couple of surveys that might talk a little bit about that. The first survey that we're looking at that we wanted to reference is from PayScale, where they've actually done this earlier this year, and they found that a bigger paycheck is still really the top reason that people are quitting their jobs. Closely related to that might also be the desire for a full-time position if your current employer is only able to employ you part-time, and as well as the desire for promotion. So although these might not be solely based on pay, the desire for a higher wage could be part of that decision as well. And then as we get a little bit deeper into that, as we would suspect, because our priorities may shift over time, we find that there are inevitable differences between the generations and why they choose to leave their jobs. A greater percentage of millennials will leave for higher pay than Gen Xers and baby boomers. Millennials and Gen Xers are more likely to quit because they're not happy with their jobs. And then while a larger percentage of boomers leave their job because they feel their organization's values are not aligned with their own, and a higher percentage of Gen Xers are more likely to leave than other generations because they want a promotion. But now it's also worthwhile to look at what attracted people to a new organization as they leave their old one, and to note that the #1 reason is not money. So the majority of people starting new jobs at an organization cited that they chose mainly for the opportunity to do more meaningful work. And if the people that quit for the hopes of more pay, 20% of those chose their new organizations primarily for the opportunity to do more meaningful work. And of course, as we expect employees' priorities to change over time, so what they may want or what they may need doesn't necessarily coincide with what they find meaningful as well.
Thanks for that, Gazelle. Well, I also looked at the Glassdoor survey. This is from a couple of years ago, back in February 2017, but it was over a good size sample, 5,000 real-world job transitions from resumes on their site. And this, interestingly, showed that compensation wasn't the lead reason why people left organizations, but the culture and values scored highly. But you can obviously see Comp and Ben is tracking quite a close second. Now, I could be very cynical here looking at the results from those two surveys, the one from PayScale and the one from Glassdoor. If you think about it, PayScale is a company providing compensation services, so they are probably going to say that comp is the main reason people leave organizations. And Glassdoor, we know that's known for its reviews of companies and its culture insight of other companies. But either way, what we can see here is compensation features highly. But I think it's really useful to look back to some of those predictive analytics models that I mentioned in the case studies and look at some of the factors that they use for predicting attrition when we think about the reasons why people leave organizations. And that tends to be a broader basket of metrics, and only some of them are pay related, but you do get other items there like tenure in role or performance, which kind of track with pay, but they also do count a number of other factors, personal factors like age, commute time, how many times their manager has changed, who their manager actually was, in these models, and they're all used to predict how long that you think an employee is going to stay with your organization. So let's go back again to our question and say, can you pay to retain talent? Well, I think an interesting thing to think about here, and this is something that, in studies that I've done with clients and with organizations that I've worked, when you've done exit interviews of why people are leaving the organization, it's often easier for them to say that they're leaving because of pay. And that's not necessarily always true. It's less offensive to say you're leaving for pay than saying, I don't like my manager, or I really don't like the culture around here. So, I think that's an interesting point to think about if you're looking at analysing why people are leaving your organisation.
And there isn't always just one smoking gun reason that makes a good employee quit. It's typically a combination of lots of things that weigh on their minds and that might impact their decision to quit over time.
And we also know that underpaid employees can be inclined to continue working with an employer if their other needs are being met. So, that often quite comes into play with work-life balance issues. So if they've got the offer of flexible working, maybe they've got the offer of working closer to home, they may be willing to accept lower pay, or that their pay is not keeping pace with market because there are other things that they value more than pay.
So what's important is that we capture accurate metrics on why people leave your organization, and then you can build a picture of the factors that actually influence retention for you. Only then can you understand what role pay really has.
So we're talking about pay's role in attrition, and I wanted to consider a few other things there. So, pay is definitely a factor. We can see it's quite highly ranked in terms of why people leave organisations, but what is it specifically about pay that makes people leave organisations? And, when we talk about pay fairness a lot and pay transparency, I often come back to this point. People's pay perception is more critical than the absolute value that they're paid, and that really does come into play when people are looking at leaving organisations. And we know that when considering pay inequality, they compare themselves not only externally, but internally to their colleagues or their managers, not to mention maybe the bosses in the C-suite. And when they're looking at internal peer relativity comparisons, performance also has a key part to play here. So they're looking at whether they're a high performer, whether they consider themselves a high performer, and how they're paid relative to their peers. So it really is worth also understanding what aspects of the reward package your employees value the most. So it's not as simple as I'm not paid enough, and that's why I'm leaving. A lot of it's more to do with pay understanding.
That's very true, Ruth, and it's a very valid point. Your pay philosophy or pay brand can be a key reason why somebody leaves your organization. If your pay differentiation is weak and they believe that they're a higher performer, they'll look for other organizations who offer a greater return for their efforts. So thinking about how you are tackling pay differentiation is important. We talked in our last webinar about identifying top talent as part of high impact compensation, and you can find that information on our website. The employee experience can't be improved without addressing the importance of compensation in targeting critical workforce segments. There was a session that was presented by Deloitte at the World at Work conference recently that I attended that went into this in a lot more detail. So, in the end, how can we fix this? Well, as we've discussed, we can't fix it by simply paying people more, but rather by focusing on paying people more correctly. We talked about employee perceptions of pay and pay fairness. This can be tackled with pay transparency. Companies are putting the systems in place to ensure that they have a transparent approach to setting and advancing pay that can easily be understood by all stakeholders. And then, of course, ensuring that you're supporting your managers in the communication of pay to employees, that's vital. We talked about this in our January webinar, which I've included in the link here as well. And then you should also consider supporting a values-based compensation philosophy that reinforces the values and drivers of your organization. This goes back to our discussion about pay segmentation and identifying who your critical talent is and ensuring you're differentiating pay for them. So the answer that you can't pay people to is the answer that you can't pay people. That brings us to our second survey question. What types of compensation are you currently using for retention? With this survey, you should be able to select all that apply or select none if you don't use compensation for retention at all.
I just need to try and find the polling question. Can I give you control, Gazelle? Can you try and find it?
Yes. Let me do that. Doesn't look like it's giving it to me.
No. Okay, we'll move on from that polling question then. So we were just going to have a conversation there about, you know, whether any particular types of compensation that you use for retention. You know, we were going to ask you whether you use retention awards, base pay increases, spot bonuses, or LTIP. And I know it's something, you know, quite often that Gazelle and I are asked. You know, I think we have our own views about those. I think there's very mixed results. Retention awards, from my perspective, you know, you risk that the employees take the money and leave anyway. And sometimes, you know, particularly if you do widespread retention awards, they can kind of hint at desperation. If they're not done well, that's a kind of sinking ship analogy. And then if you're thinking about base pay increases, I think, again, and similar to spot bonuses, actually, they tend to have a bit of a short-term fix, because although people, as we said earlier, may say pay is the reason they're leaving an organization, that may not actually be the reason. So just paying them more, you know, as we've said, isn't really necessarily the answer. And LTIP's an interesting one. You know, it's been seen as a critical retention tool, particularly for execs. But I think it very much depends on the type of organization you are and how much people value stock in your company. And I think more and more, when you think about LTIP, it's become more of a risk management tool. Rarely people stay because of LTIP, and there's still the likelihood, you know, that they can be bought out from their next employer. So sorry we couldn't get that polling question working for you there. So back to our question again, can you pay to retain talent? Well, I think we've concluded that you cannot just pay people more. It's much more nuanced than that, and it's interesting to consider this in the context of how reward is changing or needing to adapt to meet today's new business challenges. And I think that's just where I wanted to close on, really. So how reward is evolving. Well, due to those restrained wage budgets and the drive for productivity, we've seen a growing demand for compensation that needs to be much more focused on recognizing high performance. So no more peanut butter approach, pay differentiation is required. And we've also seen this move from one size fits all to increasing differentiation, or we've called it segmentation today, in reward. So there's a need to pay with the different types of talent in our organizations, and recognizing high talent, recognizing maybe those employees who are on a structured career trajectory where pay bands are more appropriate, or maybe thinking about the short-term talent that we need to buy in that's in high demand and you need to pay a higher rate for. And then returning to the point we made at the beginning of this webinar about how reward has in more recent years become a much broader definition when we talk about total reward, and has included things like benefits, well-being, recognition, and other factors. And this is kind of also having an impact on how we operate as reward. I mean, I remember my days as a practitioner, we were kind of always locked away in a back room somewhere, you know, right at the back of the HR function. That was mainly to do with the kind of the confidentiality of the information that we were handling. But now when we're looking at a broader reward package to retain talent, we need to think about how we can collaborate with our other colleagues in HR and also our business leaders to look much more holistically at what impacts talent and how we can retain talent. Another interesting thing is, you know, we used to be control. We used to be in total control of the information that our employees got from us. You know, anything they heard about their pay mainly came from us. But with the advance of technology and sites like Glassdoor and other crowdsource available sites for sourcing pay information, you know, workers can get reward data from anywhere they want and make their own perceptions of fairness. And I think, you know, most of us know that the accuracy or the quality of that data isn't always great. So those perceptions may be slightly warped. And I think the final point is really this move from employee engagement, which tends to look at a particular moment in time, to an employee experience. And this is very much being talked about. It may be being talked about in your organisations. So that considers engagement at all the touch points of the employee life cycle, and especially looking at it not from the employer's perspective, but from the employee's perspective. So this is a much more employee-centric way of thinking about what will our people think about our organisation, what will our people think about compensation and benefits, thinking about your pay brand and what it says about you, your organisation, and how your employees perceive that. And that's, again, as we've said today, you know, a really important part in the pay retention factor. So I think you need to consider all these factors when looking at how pay impacts talent retention in your organisation. So I think, Gazelle, you were going to close with a few key takeaways from our session.
Yep, so to wrap this up, here's some key takeaways. Again, the accurate metrics are important. You need to make sure that you're capturing accurate metrics on why people are leaving your organization to understand what factors influence retention for your organization in particular. And it doesn't look like I have control if you want to go to the next.
Okay, sorry, I may be.
Sorry, no worries. You also need to have a good understanding of what elements of your reward package are valued by your employees, as it's likely different depending on what type of organization you have. And then, as we've been hearing time and time again in discussions about pay, transparency and good communications are absolutely key. And then also consider whether you are segmenting pay for specifically targeting key talent. So again, going back to making sure that we're focusing on that key critical talent and ensuring that we're paying them according to what's important to them as well. And then finally, making sure that you understand that compensation should only be considered as part of the broader reward package that's aligned with your organization's culture and values.
Thanks for those, Gazelle, and hopefully there'll be useful takeaways for you from the session. So we'd like to open the floor to questions now. We do have a couple that were submitted to us before we joined the session. So if you weren't here right at the beginning, you can just type in your questions into the panel and we can pick any of those up. But I'm going to pick up, as you think about those questions, I'm going to pick up a couple of the questions that we had submitted to us earlier. So I think we had someone who was attending the session who wanted to specifically ask about using deferred compensation and whether it should be for people identified as part of the talent pool or whether it should be tied to delivery of business objectives. And I kind of had to reread that question a couple of times because I think actually the people in your talent pool hopefully should be the people who are delivering your business outcomes, because normally it is your key talent that's the most productive there. So I think it's probably more a case of, you know, have you got your talent assessment right for your talent pool? Are they the ones delivering the most business goals to your organization? And if that's aligned, then, you know, you should get that right. And then the second question we had was, do you have any thoughts on how talent is identified? Currently, we only use manager assessment. Any other ideas? So we did talk quite a lot about that in our last webinar last month on high impact compensation. It's definitely not an easy task because you kind of need to definitely work with your business leaders. You need to understand, you know, what are the key drivers of business success in your organization, and to do that you need to define what business success is. But as we said, all our webinars you can get back to through the events page on our website, and the decks and the recordings are there. So if you want to get back to any of the resources that we've mentioned today, you can do that. Do you have any other questions that have come in for you, Gazelle?
I don't see any at the moment.
Okay. Right, well, as I said at the beginning of the session, to talk to us more about the content from today, then please do get in touch. A reminder again, we have recorded the session, and as you registered and attended this webinar, you'll get a copy of PDF version of the deck, and you will also get, be able to access the recording. You can get in touch with us here. We will be running another webinar in June, which I think is looking at future trends in compensation and how changes in the workplace are impacting compensation. So we look forward to seeing you again on one of our webinars. Glizelle, thanks for joining me on this session today.
Absolutely, thank you.
And thank you all very much for joining us.